In many respects, Gloucestershire is the quintessential English village. Just 100 miles or 160 kilometers west of London, it's cozy, picturesque, and quaint beyond compare. It was also where a retired teacher in her 50s finally met the man of her dreams in the summer of 2000. They got married a few months later. However, the relationship soured quickly and ultimately led to a number of violent confrontations, contentious legal proceedings, and ultimately a shallow grave in a remote corner of a sprawling farm. Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest and most sincere condolences to the friends and family of Kate Wakefield. Kate Wakefield was born in Gloucestershire in 1952. As a teenager, she, her parents, and 5 siblings moved out of town and into the Fennells farm in the nearby village of Lypiat. They found life on the farm rewarding and invigorating, but Kate eventually took her A-levels because she wanted to become a fully qualified teacher. Kate and her sister inherited the farmhouse when the parents passed away a few years later. Then, in 1999, a handsome young bachelor named Adrian Prout moved to the farm. At the time, he was going through an unpleasant breakup and dealing with a failed partnership in the pipe-laying business. Adrian lived in a tiny travel trailer with few amenities, but the farm's fresh air and wide-open spaces were just what he needed to get through those tough times. Adrian brought a few pieces of heavy construction equipment with him when he moved to the farm, and he was always willing to lend a hand when there were big projects that needed to be done. He usually kept to himself, but everyone liked having him around. He and Kate's brother, Ted, eventually became good friends.
He was just an ordinary chap trying to get on, really. He worked hard, and he's very good at making money. And I became friends with him.
Kate and Adrian were just about as different as two people can be. She was caring and personable, but she had an explosive temper and was prone to drastic mood swings. Adrian was more introverted and mild-mannered, but he and Kate were immediately attracted to one another when they met on the Fennell farm in 2000. Just a few weeks into their budding relationship, it looked like Kate had finally found a romantic partner with long-term potential. She and Adrian were married at St. Mary's Church in Gloucestershire less than a year later. The newlyweds stayed on the farm after the wedding and seemed happier than they had ever been before. Then, in the fall of 2000, they bought a home in nearby Frampton-on-Severn for £210,000. Kate put £150,000 from her savings towards the purchase. She and Adrian lived there for a few years before selling it for a nice profit. By then, they both wanted to own a farm of their own. They spent a few months looking for the perfect property, and they immediately knew they had found it when they first set their eyes on Red Hill Farm. At £820,000, it wasn't cheap, but Adrian was back in the pipe-laying business and making good money, and with the profit from their first home, they were able to get financing. They moved into the idyllic 270-acre farm just a few weeks later.
From Adrian Prout's point of view, I think that the move to Red Hill Farm finally fulfilled a lifetime dream. He'd always wanted to own his own farm, and he'd finally got what he wanted.
On the outside, everything appeared perfect, but there were already significant problems between them. Kate enjoyed going to the theater and eating out, but Adrian rarely left the farm. They bickered constantly and regularly lost their tempers with one another, and things got even worse when Adrian's daughter Laura came to live with them.
Things weren't going as well as they could have been, but like all marriages, you have your ups and downs and you have to work at it. It's difficult both sides. It must have been difficult for Laura accepting somebody else, and it was difficult for Kate. She'd never had children.
Kate had been a teacher for years, but she didn't have any children of her own and had never lived with anyone else's kids. She also resented the fact that her husband usually took his daughter's side when any conflict rose between them. Kate often wrote about her marital woes in her diary. On one occasion, she noted that Adrian had always made time for his daughter, but was usually too busy to do anything with her. And when he wasn't with Laura, he spent hours out on the farm hunting small game and shooting clay pigeons.
When I first met Adrian, I was quite keen on shooting then, game shooting, and he couldn't see the fascination of it at all. And it turned totally around in the end. He became obsessed with it.
Eventually, Adrian started a small shooting and hunting side business on the farm. In the beginning, it brought Kate and Adrian closer together. She helped to book the guests and organize events and prepare meals. But it also led to a big blow-up just before Christmas of 2006, when Laura invited her boyfriend to lunch. Kate spent the morning preparing a nice meal, but just before noon, Adrian, Laura, and her boyfriend changed their plans and decided to eat elsewhere. Kate was understandably livid. When they returned home that afternoon, she and Adrian got into such a spat that Laura and her boyfriend immediately left. Eventually, they wound up screaming at each other in the driveway outside the kitchen. Adrian got so angry that he grabbed Kate by the shoulders and slammed her into the car with such force that it dented the metal fender. She spent the rest of the day getting drunk and avoiding her husband, but when they ran into one another the following morning, he told her that he wanted a divorce. Kate stormed out and drove to her sister's house, but she returned to the Red Hill farm later that evening. After that, she and Adrian enjoyed a month of relative calm, but it only lasted until mid-February of 2007. One afternoon, Kate called her sister-in-law Linda to tell her that Adrian had been arrested. Kate had been drinking and was hysterical when Linda arrived at the farm. She said that Adrian had nearly strangled her by the empty swimming pool behind the farmhouse.
We had a call. She said something terrible's happened. Is it okay for me to stay? And I said yes. She said it's awful. Adrian's been arrested. I've had a drink. So I said, we'll come and get you. Stay where you are. We'll come and get you. She was terribly upset. And she then went to explain what exactly had happened.
Adrian was taken into custody, and Kate went to stay with Linda and Richard. But the charges were eventually dropped because there weren't any visible marks on Kate's body, and police could not verify her accusations. When Richard ran into Adrian a few days later, he told him that he had no idea where Kate was. But Adrian apparently knew he was lying because Kate had called him earlier that morning. It was unclear why she called or what they talked about, but shortly after the conversation, she hired a solicitor and initiated divorce proceedings. By then, Kate just wanted to sell the farm, get the divorce, and put the whole sordid relationship behind her. On the other hand, Adrian could not bear the thought of selling the Red Hill farm. Since the farm was valued at £1.2 million, Kate told him that he would have to buy her out for £600,000 if he wanted to keep it. Adrian considered the offer, but a month later he asked Kate to meet him at a local pub to discuss staying together and keeping the farm. Kate wasn't sure it was a good idea, but Linda said that she could go as long as she was careful. The meeting was awkward at first, but after a few drinks, Kate called Linda and Richard to let them know that she would be spending the night with her husband. They had a romantic evening together on the farm, but the next morning, Adrian's warmth and calm had been replaced by icy indifference. Their relationship continued to deteriorate, and in March of 2007, Adrian told Kate that he did not love her and wanted that divorce. In her diary, Kate looked back longingly on how perfect things had been when they first moved to Red Hill Farm. Then, in April of 2007, she wrote that Adrian had become sexually interested in her again. She couldn't understand why he was sending such mixed messages, and the tension between them was so unbearable by that summer that she decided to take a vacation to Salisbury with her sister-in-law, Linda. Before she went, she hired a house sitter to water the plants, walk the dogs, and to help Adrian with the chores. When she was away, Adrian told her that he and the house sitter were getting along well and had even gone shooting together. Kate immediately suspected that they were doing more than just shooting clay pigeons. But at that point, she apparently thought that she and Adrian might still be able to work things out. When she got home from her vacation, she booked a day trip for the two to Italy, but Adrian told her that he wasn't going at the last minute.
I didn't know whether Adrian was having an affair or not really. Kate was pretty convinced that something was going on. I did feel sorry for her because she strongly believed in her wedding vows. Although we got on well, they should have been together. He was supposed to be on that holiday, not me.
Linda ended up going with Kate instead. When Kate returned to the Red Hill farm on October the 19th, she found Adrian having a pleasant lunch with the house sitter and her daughter. She immediately accused them of having an affair. They both denied it, and the house sitter told her that she was making a fool of herself. Kate eventually apologized, but the next day, Adrian told her that he wanted her out of his life because she was fat, old, and unattractive. The rising tension came to a head one afternoon a week later when they took some shooting clients to a local pub after a long day on the farm. Kate had been drinking for hours, and she was slurring her speech and being rude and aggressive towards the house sitter, Adrian, and her daughter Laura. She eventually slapped Adrian in the face when he refused to admit that he was having an affair.
Kate wasn't a drinker, but she did take to drink sometimes when she was very upset. And she consumed a fair drop of alcohol that day.
She spent that night with a neighbor, and later that week her solicitor informed her that the fair buyout price for the Red Hill farm was $800,000, not the $600,000 she had demanded from Adrian before. After all, she had put up the lion's share of the money when they bought their first home. Adrian was beside himself when she told him he would need to cough up an additional £200,000. He just didn't have the money. Red Hill Farm was everything to him, and now he felt powerless as it was being ripped out from under his feet. Shortly thereafter, he discovered that Kate had withdrawn £15,000 from a mutual account to cover her solicitor fees. A number of bills were coming due at the farm, and without that £15,000 he would not be able to pay them. Adrian was at the end of his rope. But Kate was in good spirits when she called on her sister on Monday, November the 5th of 2007. Kate ran a few errands later that day, but neither Linda nor Richard saw or talked to her. Richard wasn't too concerned, but Linda sensed that there was something wrong almost immediately. Kate's car was in the driveway when her friend David dropped by the following day, but she wasn't there. He called Kate and Adrian multiple times but got no response. When he finally talked to Adrian the next day, he said that he had no idea where his wife was. Linda didn't know either, but she and David found it odd that Adrian had not reported her missing. Over the next few days, Linda, Richard, and David urged Adrian to call the police. He didn't seem to care where Kate was or have any interest in finding her, but he eventually relented and reported her missing on November the 10th of 2007, 5 days after she had disappeared. Kate's friend David and brother Richard were already at the Red Hill farm when officers arrived to take the report. After asking Adrian just a few routine questions, the officer became convinced that he wasn't dealing with just a missing persons case because Adrian seemed totally unconcerned and had waited so long to report Kate missing. He said the last time he saw her was around noon on Monday, the 5th of November 2007. He couldn't explain why her car was there or why her purse, keys, and phone were still in the bedroom. The following day, Adrian was taken to the police station in Gloucester for more questioning.
During the time that she's been missing, have you looked through her room, looked through her property?
No.
When were you were aware that a car had been left behind? Were you aware of any other things that had been left behind that she'd normally have with her?
No, I couldn't find her car keys, which was strange. So they always put in the drawer in the kitchen and they weren't there. So I assumed she had her car keys with her.
If she goes out, I mean, what stuff would she normally take with her of a personal nature? I mean, credit cards, purse, things like that?
Yeah, phone.
Were you aware that the phone was still at home?
No. I didn't even ring that phone and I never heard it.
But if she went out of her own volition, then that's the type of stuff that she would take with her.
Yeah.
And you weren't, even though weeks gone by, you had no concern about her well-being, and you.
Well, I did, but I thought if things weren't good, someone would have rang me or
Once again, Adrian seemed detached and emotionless. When asked what he had done to find her over the previous 5 days, he said nothing.
What have you done between Monday and yesterday to try and find her?
Nothing.
Why not?
Well, I assume that that's what she wanted. And no one has rang me. Like, if her friend or Richard had have known that she was with, they would have rang me and said, "Where is she?" I hadn't heard anything, so I thought, must be alright.
He assumed that Kate didn't want to be found and that she was all right. She was probably staying with a friend or relative. He also said that he had only reported her missing because David and Linda had urged him to do so.
What made you finally decide to call the police yesterday?
Well, David, a friend, he rang me up. Well, I saw missed calls on my phone on the Friday night. And then, time I got back, it was 11:30. I thought, I won't ring him now, and in the morning I'll ring him. And then he rang me Saturday morning and said, "Well, I'm concerned about Kate." And I said, "Well, I thought she was with her sister." And he said, "No, we've tried your sister." And I said, "Well, have you tried so-and-so?" And everyone I mentioned, he tried. So we sort of said we better get the police involved.
And whose decision was that to get the police involved?
Investigators later confirmed that Adrian did not have any contact with Kate after November the 5th. Since they had no proof that a crime had been committed, they released him after another round of questioning on November the 11th.
And there's been no contact from Kate since you last saw her around lunchtime on Monday the 4th.
No.
Have you had any missed calls on your phones from numbers that you don't recognise, or?
No.
Nobody knew what had happened to Kate, but her friends and family suspected foul play and they didn't think they would ever see her again. The authorities agreed, and a senior investigator was appointed on Wednesday, November the 14th. For more than a month, dozens of officers, investigators, and forensic experts searched the home and the surrounding 270 acres of farmland and forest. Initially, they identified more than 100 potential burial sites, but no trace of Kate was ever found. Later, cadaver dogs were brought in. One dog, named Eddie, was tasked with going through the farmhouse room by room.
Believing that there was no crime scene there and not seeing any physical signs of a crime scene, it was difficult for me then to decide that we're going to put this dog in there that was going to tell me something differently. Now, it searched the house all the way through and then went into the main lounger of the house, and when it got between the patio doors and a settee, the dog started barking. Now, I wasn't sure what this meant at that time, and when I spoke to the handler, he explained to me that that was his indication that a dead body had been in that area.
There was a clear indication that a dead body had once been at that precise location in the farmhouse. Now, with a potential crime scene on their hands, crime scene experts from the Forensic Science Service began a meticulous search of the home. But to their surprise, they found no blood, no signs of an altercation, and no indication that someone had tried to clean up a gory scene with harsh chemicals or detergents. They still couldn't rule out the possibility that Kate had disappeared willingly or had committed suicide. Even so, Adrian was still a person of interest. He had not been arrested or charged with any crime, but he couldn't live in the house until the investigation came to an end. Ironically, he moved in with his close friend, Kate's brother, Ted, on Fennel Farm. Soon after he arrived, Ted's wife remarked how silly Kate would feel when she showed up and realized what a stir she had caused. To that, Adrian allegedly replied, "She's never coming back." Investigators could not prove that Adrian had committed a crime, but as far as motive, there was a financial incentive. He would have to sell the farm or come up with $800,000 to buy Kate out if she had gone through with the divorce. They also considered his alleged affair with the house sitter. She and Adrian both maintained that their relationship was strictly platonic, but investigators uncovered messages in which Adrian told her that he loved her. When officers questioned the house sitter, she admitted that Adrian had become uncharacteristically distant.
She was concerned about Adrian's demeanour. He seemed quite distant, almost upset, and she started to ask him what had happened. And in response to one of these questions, Adrian said, "They've taken her away."
Afterward, she was sure that he was involved in her disappearance. Investigators thought they had a pretty good idea of how things had played out on November the 5th, but they had to prove that Kate was dead before the case could move forward. Kate hadn't been seen or had not been in contact with anyone since November the 5th. She had not used her ATM or credit cards or withdrawn any money from the bank. She had also missed a few appointments without calling to cancel or to reschedule, which was strange for her. Along with Eddie detecting the scent of human remains in the farmhouse, investigators finally felt they could prove that Kate was dead and that she had been murdered. The case was entirely circumstantial, but Kate's diary entries went a long way towards establishing a pattern of violence between her and Adrian. Then, in mid-February of 2008, when it seemed like the case had stalled, Richard and Linda Wakefield got a surprise visit from an officer who told them that Adrian had just been arrested and charged with Kate's murder.
It was particularly difficult for Ted because he was close to Adrian. Ted very much saw Adrian as a close friend.
It finally seemed like Adrian would face justice for the crime he allegedly committed against Kate. However, the news also confirmed what they had been suspecting all along, that Kate was dead and had been since early November 5th of the previous year. The case took an unexpected turn in January of 2009 when the police told the press they no longer suspected Adrian of killing Kate. But just a few weeks later, they arrested him again and charged him with murder in the magistrate's court. By then, Kate's brothers and sisters were absolutely drained. The wheels of justice were turning far too slowly, and they were mortified when the accused murderer was released on bail. Even so, the trial eventually got underway at the Bristol Crown Court on January 12th of 2010. As Kate's distraught and frustrated family looked on in horror, Adrian repeatedly claimed that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He also informed the court that he had moved on and gotten engaged, and that his fiancée had just given birth to a baby girl. This did not sit well with the judge, Kate's family, or anyone else in attendance. This was especially true since Adrian showed almost no emotion, and because he and his new family were living in the house at Red Hill Farm that he had once shared with Kate. Despite relentless pressure from the prosecutor, Adrian maintained his innocence throughout the trial. That said, almost no one believed his testimony. In the end, the judge and prosecution agreed that Adrian snapped during a heated argument and strangled Kate with his bare hands, and he had buried her somewhere on the farm or in a rural area nearby. The scenario explained why there were no traces of blood found in the home like they would have been had she been killed with a gun or knife or blunt object. Adrian was convicted of murder on February 10th of 2010. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years. Kate's family and friends held hands and wept as the verdict was read, but what they really wanted was a confession and a location of her body so they could give her a proper burial. Kate's siblings weren't expecting a miracle, but they relentlessly pressured Adrian to confess to his crime and to where the body was buried. Ironically, Adrian's facade began crumbling after his new fiancée convinced him to take a lie detector test. He failed that polygraph test, and at his fiancée's urging, he ultimately confessed nearly 5 years after committing the brutal murder. He led officers to the burial site and admitted that he lost control during a particularly raucous argument. After strangling Kate, he wrapped her body up in a curtain and plastic sheeting, loaded it into the back of her Range Rover, and left. Then he had a glass of whiskey to calm his nerves and drove to a local pub to establish an alibi. Later that evening, he drove around the farm before burying Kate in a little-used pheasant pen. Adrian eventually apologized to Kate's family and admitted that he should have turned himself in immediately after the murder. The exact cause of death could not be established during a post-mortem because of decay, but additional tests confirmed Adrian's account of the events that day. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below and give us your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.